Detective Cora Nash pulled her coat collar higher around her neck as she climbed the worn wooden steps of the Parker family's home. The house stood on a quiet suburban street, lined with leafless oaks that cast jagged shadows beneath the winter's sun. A bright red tricycle had been left sprawled on the lawn. It looked abandoned, as though the young rider had broken off mid-stride, dropping it in haste. No one answered when she knocked, so she tried the door. It swung open without resistance. Inside, the living room appeared startlingly normal, as if the family had simply stepped out for a moment. A half-filled coffee mug sat on the center table. Toys were strewn around a blocky plastic bin. Over the couch hung a portrait of the Parker family mother, father, and their curly-haired son, all smiles. Nash noted the faint, stale smell in the air, the kind that settled when a house was locked too long. She called out their names. Silence. Early that morning, neighbors had reported that no one had seen the Parkers leave. The family car was still hidden in the garage. The suggestion that an entire family might vanish left an unsettling pang in Nash's chest. As she made her way into the kitchen, her eyes caught an envelope on the counter addressed to Dr. Bennett. The letter was sealed with no visible postal markings. It bore only the words, "Urgent regarding Phase 3. Nash gently lifted the envelope. Something about it felt odd. The edges were as crisp as if it had just been slid in. She peeled it open with care, retrieving a single piece of paper, a typed letter with a mix of clinical jargon and bold disclaimers. She could only parse scattered phrases at a glance. Subject recall, temporal memory mapping, unintended side effect. Horrified, she noted a reference to a trial that would be catastrophic if misused. Her heart hammered. This was no ordinary missing persons case. She carefully placed the paper back, slipped it into her pocket, and dialed her supervisor, Sergeant Romero, to request a forensic team. As she waited, she scanned the rest of the house. The bedrooms were as orderly as the living room. No signs of struggle. In the boys' room, the bed was unmade. An open storybook splayed on its front cover, as if he'd paused mid-read. The entire home gave an eerie sense of being frozen in time. Nash steeled herself and walked out to greet the forensic team 15 minutes later, uncertain why her hands were trembling. 2 days passed with no leads. Security footage from nearby neighbors turned up nothing unusual. No suspicious vehicles or nighttime visitors. Nash combed every detail of the Parker file and found no enemies, no financial troubles, and no previous calls to the house that might indicate foul play. Yet, there was that cryptic letter, presumably from the missing father's desk. Dr. Bennett was not in any local registry as a physician, so who was this Dr. Bennett? Curiosity gnawed at Nash. Something about Phase 3 and subject recall implied a scientific or medical study. She spent long hours scouring local newspapers, university announcements, and even reports of psychological experiments in the area. On the third night, just after midnight, she found an online mention of a Dr. Malcolm Bennett, a psychologist specializing in memory reconstruction therapies, affiliated with a private facility an hour outside the city. Not strictly a medical doctor, the accompanying article mentioned controversy over his work. Accusations had been made that he was performing unauthorized memory implantation trials, but no formal charges stuck. Nash stared at the screen, adrenaline stirring. The next morning she drove to the address associated with Dr. Bennett. The building was unimpressive. A 2-story beige structure surrounded by a chain-link fence and a mostly empty parking lot. A small rusted sign read, Southbridge Center for Neurological Research. Nash marched inside. The sterile reception area reeked of disinfectant and stale coffee. Opening her badge, she requested to see Dr. Bennett regarding the Parker family. The receptionist's eyes flickered with recognition at the mention of the name, but she insisted Dr. Bennett was away, no schedule to speak of. Nash left her card and was turning to leave when a man in a lab coat approached. A mild stammer accompanied his greeting. I'm Dr. Porter. I heard you ask about Dr. Bennett." His anxious expression suggested he had something to hide. They stepped into a corner where he spoke in a hushed tone. "I don't know what you're investigating, but please be careful. Bennett's work isn't... You can't only look at it from the outside. It's far more extreme than you think. Before Nash could press for details, Dr. Porter glanced over her shoulder, as if worried someone might be eavesdropping. He claimed that Bennett had advanced his experiments on memory manipulation phases that tested how deeply a subject's mind could be altered before they lost any sense of real versus implanted recollections. If you are looking for the Parkers, you might want to think about whether they were test subjects. Nash's pulse quickened. Test subjects, they volunteered, or were they forced? Dr. Porter shrugged. I don't know. Bennett is extremely manipulative. He thrives on desperate people. If the Parkers disappeared, and there's a link to his stage 3 trials, you need to examine the abandoned facility on the outskirts of Maplewood. That's where all the hush-hush stuff happened. Before she could confirm the address, the anxious doctor pressed a small note into her palm. I can't say more. Then he hurried away, leaving her stunned in the shadowy corridor. Unsure who else in the facility might be complicit, Nash exited quietly and drove off, heart drumming. As soon as she was in her car, she unfolded the note. It read, Maplewood North Wing, the locked labs. Below that, victims often lose sense of themselves. They might not remember who they are. The Maplewood facility at first glance looked deserted. Tall weeds grew through cracks in the sidewalk. Windows were boarded up, and rust ate at the hinges of a sign proclaiming deadlines for new construction. Nash had come armed with a flashlight, her sidearm, and a growing sense of dread. This was off the official path of her investigation, and she'd told no one precisely where she was going. But her instincts insisted that time was of the essence. She jimmied open the side entrance, stepping into a dark hallway with peeling linoleum. The air smelled musty, combined with a faint chemical tang. Her flashlight swept across the abandoned reception area. Worn chairs sat in a half-circle, as though waiting for patience. A flicker of motion in her beam caused her to freeze, but it turned out to be a large spider scurrying behind a desk. She spotted a directory on the wall, identifying the north wing as occupying the second floor. Quietly, she headed for the stairs. At the top, she found a corridor lined with closed doors, each bearing a room number. Most were locked. She tried door after door until one finally clicked open. Inside was a small, sterile lab filled with shelving units. Folders and manila envelopes were scattered across a metal table, and a battered computer tower sat in the corner, gutted of its hardware. One label repeatedly appeared on the file folders. Experimental therapy, Phase 3 Neuromap trials. Another, Subject J. Barker. Beneath that, references to significant progress in memory rewriting. Nash's stomach turned. So John Parker, father of the missing family, was indeed part of the trial. She flipped through pages of dense type, repeated mentions of controlled erasure, emotional dissonance, and increased compliance. As she read, she began to piece together a terrifying possibility that the family had been used as part of a forbidden experiment aimed at implanting or erasing memories, to transform them into blank slates. If carried out to completion, the real question was, where had they been taken, and what might they remember of their former lives? A sudden echoing thud broke her concentration. She turned off her flashlight and listened. Another muffled bang rang out from somewhere down the hall, too deliberate to be the mere settling of an old building. Heart pounding, she placed the folders back into place. Aside from a few crucial pages, she slipped into her satchel and moved to investigate. She crept along, gun in hand, each step carefully measured. The noise seemed to come from behind a door at the far end of the hallway. Light seeped from beneath it. From inside came a low, disoriented moan. It was a man's voice. Nash nudged the door open a crack. The darkness within was disrupted by flickering fluorescent strips overhead. A single figure lay half-slumped on a metal gurney, hands restrained. He wore a hospital gown. Monitors beeped softly, the screens tracking vital signs. The man's eyes were squeezed shut, and he jerked as if wrestling with some unseen torment. A second figure emerged from the shadows, lean, white-haired, and carrying a syringe. He had unsettling calm about him. Nash guessed this must be Dr. Bennett. She swallowed, deciding this was no time for subtlety. Sweeping into the room, her voice cut through the stale air. "Police! Step away from him. Bennett's face registered surprise, but he steadied himself almost immediately. The corner of his mouth curled up in a measured smirk. "Detective, you're poking your nose where it doesn't belong," he said quietly, placing the syringe on a nearby tray. His voice had an eerie steadiness. "I can guess why you're here." Nash aimed her gun at him, stepping forward to check on the man on the gurney. He was semi-conscious, and under the harsh fluorescent light, she saw a name tag from the facility pinned haphazardly to his gown. C. Parker. C. Parker? Could that be Charles Parker, a different family member? Confusion tickled her mind. She only knew of John, his wife Alyssa, and their son, but memory manipulation? Could this be the father, but with a different name, or a brother? Either way, the man's features vaguely recalled the portrait in the living room, though his hair was shaved and sunken cheeks gave him a gaunt appearance. "Did you kill the Parkers?" Nash asked, glancing at the readouts on the monitors while keeping her gun trained. Bennett chuckled softly. "Kill them? My dear detective, I've done nothing of the sort. I've unlocked them. The constraints of memory can be quite oppressive. If you're here for them, well, they no longer know who they are. They are like projects in motion." Anger flared in Nash's eyes. "People's minds are not your projects. Now unstrap him. Where are the others?" Bennett didn't budge. Instead, he leaned against a table of instruments. "You risk undermining years of research. Do you have any idea what you're dealing with? The potential, the breakthroughs in understanding memory, identity? This man," he gestured to the helpless figure, "is on the verge of purging trauma. He'll be free of guilt, free of regret, but you drag him back into the unhappy life that haunted him." She moved closer, noticing that the man on the table had an IV line running from his arm to a bag of murky fluid. The entire setup reeked of unethical human experimentation. With her free hand, she reached for her phone to call in backup, but Bennett stepped forward swiftly. In a flash, he slammed a hand onto her wrist, forcing the phone from her grip. It clattered to the floor. Nash gritted her teeth, yanking free. She brought her gun up again, determined to end this standoff. But her mind reeled with the precariousness of the situation. If she wounded him, she might never find the rest of the family. Sensing her hesitation, Bennett gave a faint eye roll. "You're probably more curious than you let on, detective. You might even be enticed by the possibility of rewriting your own regrets, your own pains. Why wouldn't you be? Isn't that the promise of a better tomorrow?" "I'm not interested in your twisted sales pitch," she snapped. "Stop moving." He raised both hands with exaggerated surrender. "All right, if what you want is to rescue them, do you realize they might not even remember who you are? They might not even remember themselves. But I'll show you." He gestured to the door. "Care to see the rest?" Cautious though she was, Nash needed answers. She gestured for him to go first, grabbing the set of keys from a hook on the wall. She uttered a quiet reassurance to the man on the gurney that she'd return before ushering Bennett into the hallway. "Where are they kept?" He led her past locked doors until they reached another sealed alcove. She unlocked it, gun at the ready. The sight inside made her gasp. Rows of small windowless rooms lined both walls, each with a glass panel on the door, and in each, a person sat on a cot, staring blankly into space, as if robbed of their sense of reality. Some paced in circles, muttering unintelligible phrases. Others appeared docile. Bennett's voice behind her was velvety, almost triumphant. "Welcome to the final stage of memory purification. Each volunteer, some voluntary, some coerced, was searching for an escape from the burdens they carried. I gave them that gift." She glared at him in horror. By erasing who they were? She scanned the faces behind the glass. Her heart pounded as she recognized Alyssa Parker from the family photo. The once lively woman was huddled in a corner, trembling. She barely looked up when Nash whispered her name through the door's narrow opening. In another room, a child sat cross-legged, eyes distant. He might have been 5 or 6. That had to be the Parker boy. Nash's vision blurred with anger. She turned to confront Bennett, but he was inching away. gauging whether to run. She lunged, pressing him against the wall, pinning his wrists. "You're under arrest on multiple counts: kidnapping, unlawful human experimentation, battery. You'll tell me exactly how to reverse what you've done." That crack in his facade momentarily widened. A flicker of fear swam in his gaze. Their memories won't return so easily. Full reversal requires a specialized procedure. Without it, they may remain locked in fragmentation forever. "Then you'll do it," she growled. "Or I'll make sure you never see daylight again." Her threat drew a bitter laugh from Bennett's lips. "Such negativity. You can't force them to relive the trauma that drove them to me, their old memories, some so dark that they willingly signed over their autonomy, could return all at once. It can break a mind." His words grated on her. "Better they have the choice than remain your lab rats." She retrieved her phone from her pocket, miraculously not broken when it fell, and managed to call in local units for urgent backup, requesting ambulances as well. Bennett's cold composure wavered as sirens sounded in the distance. "I'll help you," he finally muttered. "But remember, if you force reintegration too quickly, you could cause permanent psychosis. This is delicate." Moments later, the facility was flooded with law enforcement. Officers stormed the corridors with flashlights, and paramedics evaluated the catatonic patients in the locked rooms. Nash stood guard, ensuring Bennett didn't slip away. She escorted him to the makeshift lab, where the father was strapped to the gurney, and where the monitors continued to beep. Over the next few hours, medical staff carefully unstrapped the man and removed the IV lines. The child and mother, similarly found in the rooms, were carefully sedated for transport. Nash listened quietly as Bennett outlined the procedures for possible memory reversal. He insisted on specialized, controlled sessions, no direct dump of memory fragments. The doctors under law enforcement supervision took every note, though they eyed him with distrust and loathing. Amid the commotion, Dr. Porter arrived, apparently called in by the police as a key witness. With trembling hands, he provided documented proof of unethical practices happening under Bennett's watch. Nash read over the documents, her stomach twisting with each line. Enrollees were promised cures for PTSD, hopelessness, or crippling anxiety. The experiment had ballooned into a clandestine mission to discover how deeply they could manipulate memory to alter personalities. In the hallway, Nash encountered Alyssa, surrounded by paramedics. The woman stared at Nash with empty eyes, flicking her gaze toward the swirling police lights outside, as if trying to piece together any sliver of recognition. Nash's throat tightened. How horrifying it must be to sense the presence of strangers fussing over you, telling you you were in danger, all the while your identity was a ghost. Likewise, the boy clung to a medic's hand, wiping tears from his face, though he seemed not to understand why. He was too young to reconcile the shock. John Parker, or Charles, or whichever identity had been molded in him, sat upright on a stretcher, blinking as the sedation wore off. Nash approached slowly. She explained to him who he was, that they'd found him. He stared at her, eyes searching her face as if it might tug at locked memories. I don't know," he whispered. A flash of confusion flickered across his features. I see images, but they're not in any order." He grabbed for her wrist, desperate. "Is there a woman, a child? They were here. Is that my family?" She nodded, gently squeezing his trembling hand. "We'll help you, I promise." Behind her, officers were handcuffing Bennett, reading him his rights. His expression blended rage and defiant pride, as though he still believed in the righteousness of his experiment. Nash took a step closer, meeting his eyes one last time. "They'll recover," she said with a quiet intensity. "We'll see to it," he merely sneered. "Some will, some won't. Memory is a fragile labyrinth, detective. It's not up to the law, it's up to the mind." With that cryptic remark, Bennett was led away. Nash remained amidst the chaos, trying to suppress a shiver. She wondered how many more victims might be out there, living half-lives shaped by manipulations they couldn't even recall. At least the Parker family was now free from his immediate clutches. But what lasting damage had been done? Weeks blurred into each other. The Parker family was admitted to a specialized psychiatric unit. Court proceedings against Bennett escalated quickly, and Dr. Porter's testimony along with the seized documents all but ensured a conviction. Meanwhile, the family's progress at regaining their memories was agonizingly slow. Nash visited them a few times, initially out of duty, eventually out of personal concern. On her fourth visit, she found John Parker, the staff had encouraged using his original name, awake and gazing at photographs. He startled when Nash entered the room, though she'd knocked. The slightest flicker of a smile touched his lips. "I remember you," he said softly. "You came to the facility. You helped me." She nodded, relieved. "Yes. How are you feeling?" He placed the photo on his lap. It was a snapshot of him and Alyssa, arms around each other, a bright green park behind them. "They told me those are my memories," he said. "Sometimes a detail or two resurfaces, the smell of popcorn in the air or a dog barking. But it's like trying to finish a puzzle when most of the pieces are missing." Sighing, he rubbed his forehead. "I don't remember the pain that led me to sign up for Bennett's experiment. My old regrets. My burdens. Maybe that's a blessing. But I want to be whole again. For Elisa and our son." Nash pulled a chair beside him. "You will be. The doctors say that with gradual re-exposure to past experiences, you can regain a sense of continuity. That might bring up some painful things too, but at least you'll have a chance at healing the right way." He exhaled heavily, turning away from the window. "Alyssa barely talks. When we're in therapy sessions together, she shuts down if anything gets too intense." Nash's heart sank. "One step at a time," she said gently. "Your boy's young enough that he might be resilient in ways you can't remember. Children can adapt once they feel safe and loved." He nodded, eyes shining with tears. "I still don't feel like me. But the more time I spend, the more I sense something. A warmth when I see my wife and child. A flicker of recognition. It's enough to keep going." Late that night, Nash lay in bed, replaying her conversation with John. She wondered about the mysteries locked within her own mind. Regrets from unsolved cases, the heartbreak of her father's passing many years earlier. She recognized how seductive the idea of forgetting such anguish could be. Yet she also understood that shaping one's identity involved triumphs and failures alike. Stripping away sorrow might also remove vital lessons, experiences, and connections that define a person's core. A lingering chill seeped into the room. She flipped on the bedside lamp. Her investigator's mind churned over the details left unsettled. How Dr. Bennett had boasted about his method being bigger than any single facility. Nash had confidence he'd face grave punishment, but her intuition warned her that his research could surface again in some dark corner, waiting for those desperate enough to yield their minds in exchange for forgetting. With that unsettling thought, she struggled to find sleep. The trial was swift and damning, culminating with a guilty verdict on multiple felony counts. Bennett remained stoic as the judge read the sentence, only the occasional flicker in his eyes betraying his rage. Televised news broadcasted the story, a mad doctor who'd exploited the vulnerable for illegal experimentation. The coverage propelled conspiracy theories online. Some insisted that shadowy government agencies had funded part of Bennett's research, a claim never officially verified. Despite the swirl of speculation, one fact stood resolute. The Parker family, along with more than a dozen other victims, had been rescued from a nightmarish fate. Nash visited the Parkers one final time before they moved to a specialized rehabilitation center. Alyssa managed to greet her with a shy nod, no words, but at least an acknowledgement. The boy, clinging to a stuffed rabbit, studied Nash with solemn curiosity. John approached. "We're leaving tomorrow," he said, "to a place with more individualized care. They say we'll stay together as a family, which might help bring back a sense of normalcy." He studied Nash thoughtfully. "It's strange. I keep wanting to thank you, but I barely know you. Or maybe I do," he chuckled nervously. "But for now, I guess all I can say is that you saved our lives." She assured him there was no need for thanks. She was just relieved they had a fighting chance. As the staff interrupted them to usher the family into a group session, John paused, eyes lingering on her. "You were The first face I saw when everything was still hazy. That memory's not lost. Maybe in time we can all start new memories. Healthier ones." Nash smiled with a mix of sadness and hope, watching them depart down the hallway. The boy glanced back over his shoulder, offering a tentative wave. She waved in return, making a silent vow to herself. She would keep an eye on the Parker family's progress. She would fight to ensure that experiments like Bennett's never haunted another innocent soul. In the corridor's reflection, she saw her own tired expression. This case had left scars, weaving nightmares in her sleep about rewriting the very essence of who she was. She could acknowledge that fear and also let it fuel her determination. She had discovered the horrifying ways memory could be violated, but she had also seen resilience, the human mind's capacity to rebuild and heal piece by piece. As she walked out into the crisp afternoon air, Detective Cora Nash inhaled deeply, letting the breath cleanse her thoughts. Some mysteries lingered, but the nightmare was exposed for all to see. The Parker family lived, however fragmented, and Dr. Bennett was stripped of his twisted reign. If there was one lesson hammered home by this dark saga, it was the precious nature of truth. No matter how painful or heavy it weighed on the spirit, truth anchored people to themselves, protecting them from manipulation's darkest shadows. She glanced at the sky and made a silent promise to keep shining a light into those shadows for as long as she could.